for sure, there were a lot of developments that clearly have moved the market, and here we are back to where we started before Liberation Day and erasing all of that downfall. But these four big developments have been a part of that recovery. The biggest, of course, in my mind, was clarity on trade policy, and we got a lot of movement this week, Brian.
We really did, and I looked at this past week as almost being like one of those layer cakes, which I absolutely love because I'm a big frosting fan.
You are so thin. I find that hard to believe that you eat cake
It's
at all.
portion control, right?
All right?
It's about having that small piece. But if you think about where we started the week with the announcement from the developments in Geneva, Switzerland, between the U.S. and China, having those tariffs come down to 30% for now, for 90 days, that really, I think, lit a fire under the markets on Monday. And then on Friday, we also got the announcement from President Trump that within the next 2 to 3 weeks, we would actually have more clarity on other tariff rates as well. So, Monday started off good. Friday, you get the announcement from the president saying that before that 90-day expiration date for that pause, before that expires, that we'd get clarity there. I think that really helps. It helps us really focus now, moving from speculation about what that trade relationship might look like to being able to do some calculation about what will the economic and the fundamental effects be of tariffs about wherever they land.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting, and we'll talk about it later in the show, but the fact that it's 30%, it's just like not getting hit in the head anymore, right? We'll talk about anchoring, but that was a big piece of news, number one. Number two was clarity on the tax bill.
Yeah, that was the big, beautiful tax bill coming out of the House of Representatives.
And of course, that's Trump's big saying, right?
It's not just his saying, it was actually on the document now.
Oh, that's funny.
And so when I went to the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, his website, and you could download the outline of the bill and all the details as far as what's being proposed, it had that in big, bold letters. It is one big, beautiful bill. Going through all the details, if you think about what President Trump was talking about on the campaign trail, and even after he was elected, no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, no tax on Social Security, extending Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. You also then have all sorts of business-related deductions that are up in the air. This gives more clarity on that. Now, it is not the final word, of course. We know that the way the sausage is made, there's going to be compromise. Already they're talking about the SALT deduction, right? State and local taxes. Big issue for those representatives in the higher tax states like New York, New Jersey, California. Maybe not so much for a lot of other people, but that could be one of those sticking points where they're going to have to negotiate the details, but at least the outline is there. And I think, once again, it brings that clarity.
And that's really what we're trying to find. That's what the market really reacted positively to. The other thing that was big news was all the geopolitical clarity, again, to pound that word, around a number of places around the world, that we did see some positive outcomes.
Yeah, we did have the meeting between representatives from Ukraine and Russia. So even though Putin wasn't there and Trump wasn't there, maybe that will happen eventually, right? You have to lay the groundwork at least first. So you had that issue. Then there's also the conflict in the Middle East in terms of what's going on there. The U.S. resetting its relationship perhaps with Syria. You also then had the release of the last remaining U.S. hostage from the Gaza area. Lots of these geopolitical events. It was really a very intense week and weekend prior to that to get to some really moving the ball on a lot of these issues.
All of these things that the market reacted positively to. But, there was something for everybody this week. And of course, we have a lot of elder clients, and they really were happy about getting some pharma relief.
So the prescription drug announcement from President Trump saying that, if you look at the amount that we pay in the United States versus what's paid in other countries for the exact same drug, that there is a big disparity. Now, there's all sorts of economic and political reasons behind those disparities. And President Trump saying, let's look at this. Let's try to get what he had called most favored nation status for drug prices, is whatever the lowest price in the world is. Maybe that's what U.S. consumers should have to pay. Now, is that where we're actually going to end? When we saw the market reaction with pharmaceutical stocks, initially it was down, thinking that, gosh, if you go from, let's say $100 down to $1, that's really going to hit the bottom line of a lot of these companies. But what it really does is it gives Health and Human Services an opportunity to negotiate with the drug companies for about the next 6 months about bringing those prices lower. And then if they can't come to an agreement, about going through a more structured rulemaking process where it's subject to, let's publish a rule, get comments on it. So maybe that takes another, 3 to 6 months or so, and then come up with a coherent policy on that. And so pharmaceutical stocks, they fell initially on the news, but then actually rallied when people realized maybe it's not going to be as bad as what the headline initially suggested.
So that sharp decline that we saw earlier in the year has been erased. That doesn't mean that volatility is certainly not going to go away or that we got the all clear sign. There still is a risk of recession. But this was 4 nice pieces of information the market digested and reacted well to it.